invitation to London and to this workshop. I guess it is not unexpected, but you will see emerging during my talk a few connections, more or less precise and immediate, with other talks that we have heard before. The title is, of course, a bit of a provocation. I mean, human factors in mathematics, this can be anything, so you should read it from the end. I mean, you see I'm trying, at least also in the title, by specifying a time span, to be relatively precise and to narrow down my subject on certain phenomena. So in the introduction, I'm going to explain to you what I will really be talking about, not any old human factor you might want to be able to associate to the practice of mathematics, because there are of course many. So just to get into the subject, what I will be addressing, but more precisely in the period that I have been indicating, is something which, just to fix ideas, I can explain by introductory remarks of Husserl to his famous crises. So crises is 1935. Jean-Michel yesterday put a lot of emphasis on this year 1935 in his talk, from his point of view, and the other parallels are not parallels between the two talks. So looking back from 1935, Edmund Husserl, writing about the crisis of all the sciences, and his kind of doing philosophy, he just says, I mean, he just observes that something happened around the turn of the last century, the Wende, the reversal, the turnaround of the last century in the general appreciation of the sciences. It did not concern their fact of being sciences, that's their scientificity, but what they had meant and could mean for the human being, for the existence, the human existence. He uses the word Dasein because in 1935, of course, he writes after his pupil Heidegger has already, his former student Heidegger has already introduced this word Dasein into philosophical terminology. And then he goes on and on describing the terrible effect of positive science as it was felt starting at the end of the 19th century. There is this sentence which is almost impossible to translate really into English. Bloße Tatsachenwissenschaften machen bloße Tatsachenmenschen. So, mere sciences of facts create mere human beings of facts or factor or whatever. You get the idea. So this is something that Husserl observed. Of course, he was not at all the only one. I just took it out of the introduction, and I'm not going to talk about Husserl really anymore. So, how do you address this big topic, this general feeling as it was expressed by people in the 1930s in a historically sound way? One way of, so first of all, I do something terrible in my talk. I select 6 individuals and will make comments on them, trying to give very short portraits of them. I don't have much time, and well, we'll see what this gives or what it doesn't give. The list is, of course, not exhaustive. I would have liked to have somebody British in there. I didn't have time for this in preparing the talk. And anyway, I mean, it's just examples. Look at it as this. It's examples, and of course, the people that I chose are people that I feel I have at least a little bit to say about. So this is the main criteria. And if you ask for historical approaches to the whole thing that I am trying to attack, then there is a very, very unlucky and terrible notion. Terrible because it was, of course, used by certain actors retrospectively in more or less apologetic aims to describe what happened in the period that I'm talking about as a conservative revolution. Sort of thinkers that had modern ideas of sorts, but at the same time were profoundly and tried to stay profoundly conservative. So this is a very difficult notion. I mentioned it right at the beginning, saying also that it is difficult and I'm unhappy with it because at certain points at least one example that I give, this really comes in as a major point of view. There is another way of trying to capture at least part of what Husserl was talking about, and this is, since we're talking about science, this is what in history of science is the study of holism in science. And to fix ideas, I'm referring to Anne Harrington's book, Re-Enchanted Science, which you may or may not know, and I give you, for what it's worth, my hands-on definition of holism, just to narrow it down, because Jean-Michel talked about holism in a much more global way. So for me, an opinion or a movement or a research program in science is holistic if it consciously calls for changing current practices of the science in question with a view to counteract one or several of the following existing tendencies, which are, this is part of the definition, perceived to be unhealthy, and replace them by corresponding alternative tendencies. So either it's against separation of scientific disciplines in favor of unity, or it's against a research by dissecting or analyzing things and in favor of a totality, taking into account a total appreciation of an object or a phenomenon. Or, and this is the case which will interest us most in the examples that I'm about to present, it's against alienation, just as Husserl just said in the introduction to his crises, of the scientific reality from the immediately intuitable or the lived evidence from the human Dasein, existence, and it is something the holistic movement tries to restore some of the unity, some of harmony between the human existence and the fact of doing science. So I have some examples. You can look at it. Many of them are, not all of them are from Anne Harrington's book. Of course, she only talks about Germany, and my examples are also in Germany. But anyway, this is more general. Okay, but not all the authors that we're going to see fall into the holistic thing. So I say right away, before even starting my list, that this holistic approach, this notion of holism in science, is not comprehensive enough to capture the whole phenomenon that we are talking about, and this will be illustrated. So here we go. Number one, Brauer. Okay, so this is a quote. Intuitionism considers, this is the thing, Intuitionism as created by Brauer, considers the falling apart of moments of life into qualitatively different parts to be reunited only while remaining separated by time. Time he accepts, space he doesn't accept, as I agree with, as the fundamental phenomenon of the human intellect, passing by abstracting from its emotional content into the fundamental phenomenon of mathematical thinking, the intuition of the bare two-oneness, two things that are only separated by time, and then from there creating the natural numbers, the infinite sequence of natural numbers. All mathematical sets of units which are entitled to that name, mathematical set of units, can be developed out of this basic, so in this translation which is in his version, intuition. So, of course, his background is fairly colorful, philosophical background, and then, of course, there is his enormous mathematical work. I just give a short list of publications, or here, the participation in the significance movement with Manoui, Welby. Sometimes, at least for the older people, the two older people that I select, it is very important to say explicitly where they stand, where they position themselves with respect to David Hilbert. Hilbert being sort of the incarnation of a free paradisiacal axiomatic approach to mathematics, which promises you to, at least in principle, after reformulation, solve all mathematical problems. And there, of course, the tension between Bauer and Hilbert is something that starts very early in the 1910s and goes on and grows, and finally there is this violent clash in 1928. And the political counterpart of this is one of the big points in Anne Harrington's book, of course, that German holism very often or typically is accompanied with certain nationalistic, rightist political tendencies, is Brauer's active participation with people organized in the 20s or in, for example, the boycott of the German participation in the Bologna ICA. Okay. So, what about the human factor here? I think one can classify Brauer as somebody who tried to enact and live a holistic movement inside mathematics. His intuition is holistic in that sense, that in the last sense in my definition, because it is founded on this immediate intellectual evidence that we have. Note, however, this is very different from what Jean-Michel was talking about yesterday in his talk in Russia. This evidence that Brauer wants to base all of mathematics on is pre-language. There's no name, there's no sign, even introduction of symbols he was very hesitant about. So it's a solipsistic, symbol-free, pre-language grounding, but it is holistic in the sense that it is definitely an alternative to mainstream mathematics, and it claims to be better than mainstream mathematics because it is grounded in this immediate human evidence. And then many authors writing about Brauer have, of course, noticed that the things that he is most famous for in mathematics, the fixed point theory, the invariance of dimension, and so on, is not proved, at least not the first time around, or sometimes not at all, by intuitionistic means. So there is this whole holistic program, and he definitely has all these publications along these lines, but there's also the rest, there's also the other side of his work. Okay? So Brauer, I think this is a very well-known example, so it's hopefully enough if I do it as quickly as I just did. I come to somebody who most of you may not know, Hugo Dingler. So just to make sure that we're not talking about a pure philosopher, I mean, he started out as a mathematician. He wrote a thesis in Munich under Albert Voss in differential geometry, and after that he did his habilitation directed by Alfred Pringsheim, and in theory, in set theory, come to a set theory, and even things that in a way touch later work of Brauer, but not in the same spirit. How to actually write down real numbers given as sequences of fundamental, as limits of fundamental sequences of quantum and so on. So trained as a mathematician, but very soon develops much more fundamental and philosophical interests, and actually turns away from mathematics in a very important way. And then the most important thing you have to know about Dingler is that he is incredibly prolific. He writes more, and on average, more than one book a year. So you have this enormous mass of books, very quickly written, not pleasant to read. But so this constitutes an enormous oeuvre, which however is not always, well, anyway. So there are a few other things you have to say about him. You have to say the thing which I start with here. He is an absolute unique phenomenon in the history of German philosophy of the 20th century, which is even more unique if you consider the fact that he only got a job in 1930 and lost this job in 1932, being retired because this was in Darmstadt, a pedagogical Hochschule, and this was closed down, so he then lived with this. So essentially he worked at home and wrote his books. But he was a German philosopher in that sense, had a job at least shortly before the Nazis came to power. And then he turned out to be extremely pro-Nazi. I mean, violently anti-Semitic things in the 1930s all the way until 1945. Really terrible to read. Partly because, if this is a good reason, to counteract a thing that he had written about Jewish culture, which was very positive in a way, in 1919. So he had to sort of make forget this old book of his. So anyway, but this is no excuse, of course. And so even though he was this, and even though he was the only philosopher, along with a few other big Nazi philosophers like Bäumler and Krieg, who, however, had their jobs until 45 before they lost them. But then after World War II, his influence really starts. This is the phenomenon. I mean, Heidegger was, of course, pro-Nazi, as everybody knows, and turned away from this in 34, 35, and 35, and turned away, well, whatever. I mean, at least he was not writing stuff the way Dingler was writing, and but all the others who kept on doing this until 45 immediately went into oblivion, whereas Dingler's influence started the very influential Lorenzen School, the Erlangen School of Constructive Mathematics and so on. And through that, it is the case today that about 60% of all those who have a job in a philosophy department in Germany today at a German university somehow can be sort of genealogically traced back to Dingler or his followers. That is not to say that all these people are Dinglerianer in the worst. I'm not saying that. Don't. I hope I didn't. But I mean, it's just as a phenomenon of academic genealogy and indirect networking influence. It's just amazing. So and not only that, but then people like Feyerabend. If you read Feyerabend's autobiography or his correspondence with Hans Albert, you know, Hans Albert is a critical rationalist. Doing things a little more intelligently than Popper. Even there, you see all these allusions to Dingler. And they say, yeah, we read Dingler and we thought it was very inspiring. So anyway, so what is he doing? This is the blue thing. Well, he has various assets that keep coming up in his works. One thing is, to found geometry, Dingler thinks you need some evidence, some real hands-on thing to do. And so his thing is the three-plaque procedure. So you have three things of metal or something which more or less are planar. And then you rub them with sand and so on. You rub them against each other, but alternating. Not just two of them, but then putting away one and then taking the other one and then putting this again and then the other two and so on. And once you keep doing this for a long time, one can prove that you get a better and better and better approximation of the Euclidean plane, of a real plane. So this for him shows and is the only way to really show constructively, you know, the existence of a plane, of a Euclidean plane. And then it is necessarily, if you do it with two, you could have something like this. I mean, you know, but if you take three, this is not the case. So you have a plane, and then by intersecting planes you get Euclidean lines and so on. And so this way you prove that the only geometry that's possible is Euclidean, really. And of course he is against relativity theory. And also those followers, I mean, Lorenzen and Janich, I mean, until today, I mean, some of the followers of this school are anti-relativity theory, which of course you can always be. I mean, by convention, you can say, to explain all these phenomena differently. Anyway, so he is a conventionalist of this constructive sort, if you want. For him, this is very important to have, on the one hand, this basis in nature and this way of producing Euclidean planes. That's one. The other thing, and it's not so clear in his writings how these things are articulated one against the other. The other thing is that he very much likes Hilbert, which you wouldn't have expected, and especially Hilbert's Foundations of Geometry. For him, this is not at all a contradiction. He likes this axiomatic procedure. In fact, he proposes an axiomatic founding of all the sciences, in particular also physics, also not against Hilbert, on the contrary. but of course he thinks philosophically a little further than Hilbert did, and so the other element which can strike one as holistic or human or whatever is that he says, well, I mean, axiom systems start from axioms, or even if you try to formalize logic, I mean, you have to start somewhere, and so then once you get to the beginning of your sequence of deductions, somebody has to justify that this that you are starting from is really at the beginning. And there you need your free will. And this voluntaristic principle is the other element which ensures that you can do axiomatics very freely, but because of this necessary voluntary act you need at the very start of your science, you are in harmony with life and so on. So it's the villain's interest. So these are some of the things that always come back in this work. And I just note here, I mean, that there are so many books I cannot, and it wouldn't make no sense to put the titles down, but there's one book about the principle of the logic independence in mathematics, which is dedicated to Hilbert and Kurt Hensel, the inventor of quadratic numbers. So, I mean, he really tries to be on top, at least at that time, until World War I, definitely on top of the modern mathematics. At the same time, he has all these philosophical preferences or persuasions that he's trying to get across. So he's a holism of sorts, and we will find something. Now I come to somebody who's, of course, much better known, Hermann Weyl. Everybody knows his name, and I will therefore be very brief. As far as I see him, at least in the first part of the period that I'm talking about, he is moving through three different phases. So the first phase, illustrated, for example, by the preface to his book Die Idee der riemanischen Fläche from 1913. This is a phase where he already has all these longings for a better harmony between this formidable formalism of mathematics and the really human interests, but it remains rhetorical. It remains in the preface. He appeals in flowery German to the reader to say, you have to work, reader, you have to dig out behind my formalism and behind the scarce words that I can write into my book the true idea, the pearl from the ground of the sea and from the topos, atopos, espratos, and you know, it's this rhetoric. So this is rhetoric, and then comes World War I, and he is drafted, and then he is liberated back to Zurich, where he now is a professor, and after coming back from this World War I service, which was for him not at all fighting or anything, he was just working in the barracks somewhere, but he started afresh and thought about many things. He read Fichte and he read Meister Eckhart, so this is interesting as a parallel, which however doesn't quite work with the mystical interests of that Brauer got from Bolland early on, 10 years earlier, with Meister Eckhart, and then from Bolland was a Hegelian also. So you have similar influences. Of course, many people read Meister Eckhart, the German sermons during World War I in Germany. This was sort of the intellectual fashion to do. But so under the influence of that, he takes this very much to heart, and he takes the feeling of endangerment in World War I into his mathematics. And the result of this is this book in 1918, Das Continuum, where he constructs a substantially poorer analysis, which has the only advantage of being absolutely secure. That is, it's a predicative deduction, construction of real numbers and deduction of properties of sequences and functions. So he sacrifices substantial force of mathematical theories in order to reduce to a level where everybody can agree and must agree. This is a major move. But the real explosion and the real turn, which then makes him for 6 or 7 years a holist, comes when he meets Brouwer in 1919, I guess, in the summer in England, and they talk, and then he jumps onto Brouwer's wagon and makes propaganda for it, as well known. He writes all these things. Brouwer, das ist die Revolution und so on. And so this is the third thing, and the third thing is definitely holistic. And just human factor may mean many things, but if you talk about holism, the relationship to the young generation is very important. You see, so I just show you this thing, which is when he gets an offer simultaneously after World War I from Berlin and from Göttingen. And everybody, including the students in Zurich, fear that he will leave Zurich. And so there's a petition by the students that have sat in on his lectures. And they say this: our conviction that Herr Professor Weil is irreplaceable has its source in the following reasons. We admire in him the ingenious creator of new cultural values, which consist in that the exact sciences come into fruitful interaction with life itself. It is this exceedingly fortunate fusion of the man and the scholar in Professor Weil, which inspires in each one of us a sense of liberation, and seems to us to guarantee most surely that whole men, this is in German, this is ganze Leute, this is Swiss German, Leute is the plural of Mann in Swiss German, not in High German. So whole men will emerge from the eighth section. Eighth section is the Department of Mathematics at that time at ETH in Zurich. So you see, okay, I go through my list of people and I come to somebody who is most definitely not somebody qualified as holistic. I just found it, just to go back 2 times, Hermann Weil was born in 1895, and only 3 years later, something one doesn't realize, Helmut Hasse is born. So Hasse is not working in the same kind of mathematics, but certainly a very important mathematician in his time, in number theory and, number theory. He had, not holistic, no way one can construe this, and I don't want to do this, I just, on the contrary, I use him as an example to point out that he's not. But he had, of course, definite ideas about how to do mathematics, which method to apply to prove certain theorems, and several times in his life, when he had proved a big theorem, he would 2 or 3 years later publish another proof, conceptually different but more satisfying for reasons that he would then lay out in his paper. But there are little things. So, for example, in 1929, he writes a very long, this is his way of doing it, 5 or 6 page long book review of Landau's Edmund Landau's monumental lectures on number theory. And there he warns that in spite of the true mathematical life, which pulses, das pulsiert zwischen den Zeilen, which pulses between the lines, and in spite of the strong personality of Landau, which you can feel through the book, Landau's style may lead only to a formal understanding as opposed to, well, how do you translate this? Inhaltliches Verstehen. Inhaltliches Verstehen. So this is, okay, understanding with regard to essential content in some sort of holistic sense. That the new generation, he says, that our generation aspires to. And so he sets himself apart from this old Landau, generation before him, and his current generation, and he said, we are not happy to just have a formally, absolutely correct deduction of a result, but we want inhaltliches Verstehen, whatever this is. So this is, and another, no, this is something very strange. Yeah, this is the original. He has this correspondence starting in 37, I believe, going on at least 2 years or 3 years into the war with Gaston Julian, the one of the Julia sets, you know, very conservative French mathematician who was, of course, visibly injured in World War I, having his nose cut off. And so, there's this letter that Hasse writes to Julia on 10th of December 1941. We're right in World War II. And it's written in French, because at that time Hasse does not work on number theory, but he works for the German Oberkommando der Marine, Marine, on differential equations if you shoot torpedoes. And so in Berlin he has some Russian who helps him and who is the teacher of French. And so he corrects his French. So here's this French letter from Hasse to Julia, and in English this reads, I still remember very well the corresponding period after World War I. At that time, in spite of our national debacle, German national debacle at the end of World War I, my generation felt uplifted by a powerful wave towards scientific studies, towards keen work and discussions about God and the world. This is Gott und die Welt, this is German, but he puts it into French. As a consolation for the national plight and as a natural reaction for those 4 years of spiritual sterility, which is how he describes World War I. So Hasse has some ways of interpreting certain things that he does or wants to do or wants to see done in mathematics against some human background, but that's where it stops. And now I come to Chevalier, who has been mentioned several times. He has been mentioned yesterday by Jean-Michel and this morning by where are they? Susanna and the potential thing. So, of course, Chevalier, you know, in French algebras, co-founder of the Bourbaki group. But and what is also known, I guess, by many people is that he had an extensive literary activity outside of mathematics, or parallel to his mathematics in the 1930s. And at that time, he was, as of its creation until its death, group of this member of this nonconformist group, Ordre Nouveau. Ordre Nouveau of the 1930s. If you're French, it's not to be confused with Ordre Nouveau of the 1970s. Which is a political, one of these nonconformist groups, small group, 15 people maybe, max, participating, meeting regularly, putting out a journal as of 1933. And their slogan is ni gauche ni droite, neither to the right, neither to the left, politically. The only thing which is completely clear to all these nonconformists, not only Ordre Nouveau, also Esprit, is that the parliamentary system, parliamentary democracy doesn't work. So that's out. We have to look for something else. We need a revolution, but this revolution should be prepared by careful intellectual work. Then it will be a little less bloody. And they come up with all kinds of ideas. Among them, they are one of the first groups that conceive of this idea of a Europe of the regions, not of Europe as a union of nations, but of regions, which has, again, a certain revival decades ago. Anyway, another name for this philosophy is personalism. Because they wouldn't call themselves individualists. So they were well, okay, I should say something more about this. And now the whole thing is that there's good evidence, and some of this I'm going to present. And one of the evidence is also that Chevalier always wanted to have his collected papers published completely, not just the math, but also his political writings, which are very numerous. And or philosophical writings. So there's evidence that you should read these two things in parallel. And now this brings me to this other point I said about conservative revolution, and this is a very unlucky notion, but there have been several studies, this is one of them, on conservative revolution in France and all these, and the question, can you establish a parallelism between these groups of the beginning 30s in France and what happened in Germany in this so-called conservative revolution all the way over the 20s and 30s. So Germany starts earlier. the reason for this decade of translation that you have here is that that France, of course, is doing pretty well after World War I psychologically, because it's won World War I. This is a stupid sentence, but there is a feeling that France is doing better and better also economically, and it is actually when the world economic crisis hits Europe, France is the last country that is hit. France in 1930, 1931 plays the role of what Germany plays today with the crisis of the euro. I mean, there's no substantial unemployment before the beginning of 1931. So there's this delayed reaction, and when finally the crisis hit France, this enormous delay, this is what creates this intellectual response by various non-conformist groups. Okay, so, but to start very calmly, I mean, here is an article from always the same year, 1935, not in this Autumn War, but in a